My mom started humiliating me at Thanksgiving, comparing me to my brother, so I stood up and made a speech. Thanksgiving has always been more performance than celebration in my family. It's the stage where my mother, Margaret Hart, proudly parades her favorites, lavishing praise like it's currency, of which, for me, she's always been in short supply. This year was no different. Our family gathered in my mother's tastefully outdated colonial-style house in suburban Vermont. There were about 15 of us, crammed into her narrow dining room, seated around the long mahogany table she's owned since I was in grade school. The centerpiece was, as always, a small cornucopia with plastic fruit and dried leaves she pulls out every November. Some things never change. What had changed, though, was the newest addition to her endless list of things to celebrate about my older brother, Samuel. To Samuel, my mother said, raising a glass of cider, her voice lilting with pride. For buying his first home, such a mature, grown-up step. Everyone clinked glasses, smiling, some genuinely, others reflexively. I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the warmth coat my throat, and nodded politely. I knew what came next. Lillian, my mother added, her tone tilting just slightly toward that familiar condescension, when will you find someone and settle down? You know, like your brother. A house, a family, it's time to think about the future, sweetheart. I set my wine glass down gently. Oh, I already settled down, I said evenly. I just didn't invite anyone who doubts me. It was like dropping a pin in a silent cathedral. Forks paused. Eyebrows lifted. My mother's mouth tightened in a way I'd seen too often growing up, an expression somewhere between offense and confusion. Samuel glanced up from his plate, his fork still hovering midair, and tilted his head like he was trying to decipher whether I was joking. They didn't know. Of course they didn't. That's what made it so easy to enjoy the silence that followed. They had never asked. They never thought to. You see, in my family, Samuel was not just the eldest, he was the cornerstone, the prodigy. As children, he won spelling bees in baseball games, I drew comic strips and wrote stories. He brought home varsity letters, I brought home library books. From an early age, it was made clear, he was the main act, and I was the intermission. When Dad left quietly, when I was 5 and Samuel was 10, it was as if all the family's focus collapsed into a single beam and landed squarely on him. Margaret molded him, invested in him, lived through him. And me? I became self-sufficient out of necessity. I can remember once placing second in the statewide science fair. I came home flushed with excitement, hoping for a sliver of the praise Samuel received weekly. Margaret looked up from folding towels and said, "That's nice, honey. Did you hear? Your brother was picked for the advanced math group again." The message was clear. If I wanted recognition, I'd need to make myself undeniable or simply learn to live without it. So I did the latter. I stopped trying. I started focusing inward. I leaned into my interests, even if no one else valued them. I taught myself HTML and JavaScript from books I checked out of the library, while Samuel spent his weekends with friends. I got into a top university on a merit scholarship, majored in software engineering, and worked part-time through all 4 years. Meanwhile, Samuel went to a small college my mother partially funded, despite his grades being average and his ambition lukewarm. I graduated with honors. There was no party. No celebration. Just a card in the mail and a half-hearted, "Good job, Lily," when I visited at Christmas. When I landed my first job at a tech startup, I didn't bother sharing it. I knew the outcome. If I said, "I just joined a team building predictive analytics tools," she'd say, "That's great. You know, Samuel's company might be starting a new analytics division too." Eventually, I stopped offering updates. They didn't notice. Our phone calls grew shorter, our visits more formal. I became a polite guest in my childhood home. But I wasn't idle. While they gushed about Samuel's latest adventure into real estate, then consulting, then insurance, I was grinding. I worked late, invested early, saved aggressively. I lived with roommates into my late 20s, packed lunches, and funneled every extra dollar into retirement accounts and a carefully curated investment portfolio. And then, earlier this year, I found a house. It wasn't flashy, hidden at the edge of a wooded reserve, modest from the outside, but stunning once you stepped in. High ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows in the study, a fireplace that made winter feel like home. I didn't need a real estate agent. I bought it directly from the owner, who was downsizing after retirement. I paid in full. I didn't tell anyone. Not Margaret. Not Samuel. Not even Aunt Clara, who always claimed she understood me best. The only person who knew was my closest friend and coworker, Dana, who helped me move a few boxes on her weekend off. For the first time in my life, I felt still. Not empty. Not overlooked. Just whole. And yet, that Thanksgiving night, as I sat there next to relatives who'd never once asked what I do for a living, surrounded by stories of Samuel's homeownership like it was the moon landing, I realized I had a choice. I could stay quiet forever. Or I could show them that while they'd been celebrating the wrong things, I'd quietly built a life worth recognizing. So I spoke. Calmly. Clearly. And I watched the world shift. After that Thanksgiving dinner, I left earlier than usual. No hugs, no leftovers packed into plastic containers. Just a brisk walk to my car in the chilly November air, the kind that nips at your ears and keeps your breath visible. The whole way home, I replayed the silence that followed my quiet revelation like a favorite track on repeat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't boast. I simply told the truth, and for once, they had to listen. Back at home, I traded the discomfort of my mother's dining table for the peace of my own. My house, mine, was warm and still. Oscar, the shaggy rescue mutt I adopted last spring, greeted me with sleepy eyes and a slow wag of his tail. He didn't need me to prove anything. That weekend, I walked the perimeter of my property, still covered in leaves from the fall. I paused at the creek in the back, where the water trickled gently over mossy stones, and stood on the deck that wrapped around the back of the house. It had become my sanctuary, a place where the noise of judgment couldn't reach me. And yet, despite the peace I'd built, a memory kept nagging at me, something I'd overheard at Samuel's mortgage pre-approval party 3 months earlier. I hadn't planned on going, but my cousin Marianne had asked me to be her escape hatch. If Aunt Mabel asks about my dating life one more time, I'm faking a phone call and walking into traffic, she texted. We'd always had each other's backs, so I went. That afternoon had been its own kind of theater. Balloons with "Congratulations, Samuel" drifted in the breeze. There were folding chairs lined up like pews in church. There was even a cake shaped like a house, complete with fondant windows and a chocolate shingle roof. What exactly are we celebrating? I'd asked my mother, who was fussing over the drink table. Oh, didn't you hear, she said, eyes glowing. Samuel's been pre-approved for a mortgage. For bedrooms in Whispering Pines. A finished basement. He's finally making real progress. I remember blinking. A pre-approval. Not a closing. Not even a signed contract. And yet here we were, acting like he'd cured polio. Later that day, while helping clean up the kitchen, I'd heard Samuel whispering to Mom behind the pantry door. I'll need a bit more than we discussed. I thought Vanessa's car payment would be smaller, but it's been tight. You already have the $15,000 I gave you, Mom whispered, trying to hush the concern in her voice. Right. I know. But maybe another card. Or a small loan just until the first tax return. This house is perfect, Mom. Vanessa loves it. I can't lose it over a few dollars. That conversation had stuck with me, floating through my thoughts whenever I'd sit on my deck or check my savings account. $15,000. That was a lot of money for Margaret. She worked as a dental office receptionist and had never lived beyond her means. I knew that money was her nest egg. Retirement, maybe. A safety cushion. And Samuel was using it like Monopoly cash. I didn't say anything then. Not at the party. Not after. Because I knew what would happen. I'd be labeled bitter, jealous, or dramatic. They'd say I was trying to ruin a good thing. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Not because of the money, frankly. Margaret could give Samuel everything she owned, and I wouldn't blink. It was the ease with which she took, the quiet assumption that she would give, and the certainty that there'd be no consequences. I also started to wonder how bad were Samuel's finances, really. Something about the way he'd talked about another credit card, the tone he used, the shrug in his voice, it didn't sound like someone stretching temporarily. It sounded like someone drowning. So, against my better judgment and moral compass, I did what someone in my position is uniquely equipped to do. I checked. My work in tech, particularly in financial applications, gave me tools most people don't have access to, and though it wasn't exactly proper, it wasn't illegal either. I requested a few public reports, ran some ID verification algorithms, and pulled Samuel's financial overview. And what I found was staggering. 5 credit cards. All nearly maxed out. His credit utilization was through the roof, averaging over 80%. He had late payments on an auto loan, a personal loan with a high interest rate, and multiple attempts at opening new lines of credit that had been declined. He was, for all intents and purposes, a financial wildfire waiting to spread. And yet, he just closed on a $490,000 home. I sat in stunned silence that night, staring at the printouts. Not because I was surprised he was in debt, but because it confirmed every suspicion I'd ever had about how far our family's blindness went. Margaret hadn't just enabled him. She was bankrolling his illusion. And the real kicker? She had never once offered to help me. Not when I worked 2 jobs during college. Not when I was behind on rent in my first year at the startup. Not when I had to sell my car to pay off medical bills after an emergency appendectomy. In fact, when I asked her once, just once, if I could store a few boxes in her garage while I moved apartments, she said, "I don't want to get your things mixed up with Samuel's." That's when it shifted. That's when I knew I'd been wasting years of energy trying to impress people who didn't see me at all. I didn't confront Samuel, not then. I didn't tell Margaret. I didn't even share what I'd found with Marianne, though I considered it. I wasn't sure they deserved the truth. But I kept my distance. I stayed polite. Cordial. Non-committal. I answered questions vaguely and changed the subject when asked about work. No one pushed. Why would they? But deep inside, I was laying down boundaries like brickwork. And by the time Thanksgiving rolled around, they were solid. When my mother texted our group chat saying, "Thanksgiving will be at Samuel and Vanessa's new home. Can't wait for everyone to see it." So proud. I almost didn't go. I stared at the message for several minutes. I kept my life quiet for a long time. I hadn't invited them in. I hadn't tried to win their attention. And I didn't need to anymore. But a part of me, a part one didn't fully want to admit still existed, wanted them to know what they'd missed. Not out of spite. But for clarity. For truth. For the little girl inside me who used to sit on the stairs with a science ribbon in her hand while everyone else clapped for Samuel's JV soccer win. So I decided to go. But this time, I wasn't showing up as the overlooked daughter. I was showing up as the woman who built a life they never bothered to ask about. The morning of Thanksgiving, I woke early, not from nerves, but from habit. Oscar was already circling the front door, his leash hanging from the hook like a reminder to stay grounded. We walked the wooded edge of the property in silence. The November air was crisp, the trees bare but still beautiful in their own way. There's something honest about a forest in winter, no leaves to hide behind, no color to distract. Just structure and strength. "Think we're ready?" I asked Oscar. He wagged his tail once and sniffed a patch of frost-covered grass. I took that as a yes. Back inside, I got dressed, not in anything flashy, but not in my usual layered cardigan and jeans either. I chose a navy blue cashmere sweater, soft but elegant, and a pair of well-fitted wool slacks. Shoes that were polished, and earrings that caught the light just enough to feel deliberate. My only splurge was a leather belt I'd been gifted by a colleague after our company's acquisition, a quiet nod to my success, known only to me. I left early and drove the hour to Samuel's new house. As I approached the neighborhood, I was immediately struck by how uniform it was. House after house, each a clone of the last. Vinyl siding in muted colors, freshly paved driveways, and perfectly manicured lawns. A developer's dream and a designer's nightmare. Samuel's home was near the cul-de-sac, decorated with seasonal wreaths and a welcome mat that said "Home Sweet Home." It was nice. Not impressive, not bad. Just expected. I rang the bell and was greeted by Vanessa, his girlfriend, who wore a festive apron and the kind of high-energy smile that told me she'd been playing host for hours. "Lillian," she chirped. "So glad you made it. Come in, come in. Can I take your coat?" "Thank you," I said, handing it over. I'd brought a small hostess gift, a wooden box of gourmet teas and honey from a specialty market. Just a little something. Thought it might go well with winter evenings. "Oh, how thoughtful," she said, briefly glancing at the label before placing it on the sideboard with other unopened gifts. The house was filled with voices, the clinking of glasses, and the scent of rosemary and brown sugar. Samuel was giving what could only be described as a guided tour, like a proud museum curator. I watched from the hallway as he showed off the kitchen. "Quartz countertops," he explained, running his hand over the edge like it was handcrafted marble. Vanessa picked the backsplash. "She's got great taste." Mom followed closely behind, interjecting praise like commentary in a documentary. "Isn't it just stunning? They've really built something special here. Oh. And wait until you see the home theater setup in the basement." I smiled, said nothing, and helped Vanessa carry a tray of drinks into the living room, where most of the family had gathered. My cousin Marianne spotted me instantly and rushed over. "You came," she whispered. "I wasn't sure you would." "Couldn't miss the event of the season," I said dryly. She snorted. "You know what I mean. It's been wall-to-wall Samuel since I got here. I think they have a picture of his pre-approval letter framed in the hallway." We chatted quietly until Mom spotted us and beelined over. Lillian, sweetheart, she said, pulling me into a quick hug. Isn't Samuel's house beautiful? I just think it's so grown up. It's very nice, I said neutrally. Lots of character. He picked the paint colors himself, she added proudly. And the neighborhood is so safe. Top-rated schools. Perfect for when they decide to start a family. That's wonderful, I replied, carefully steering the conversation back. How have you been? Oh, busy, she said, waving a hand. Helping them get settled. It's a lot, you know, with a new home. But it's all worth it. I'm just so proud of him. I bit my tongue. She didn't ask about me again. But I wasn't surprised. That wasn't the point of this visit. We moved into the dining room for dinner. Samuel, naturally, sat at the head of the table, with Vanessa beside him and Mom to his right. I was seated next to Aunt Doris, who immediately asked if I'd found a nice fellow yet. I'm focusing on my work right now, I replied. Mom jumped in quickly. Lillian's always been very independent. Not everyone wants the whole house and kids lifestyle. Samuel cleared his throat. Speaking of which, Vanessa and I have been talking. We're thinking of starting to try for a baby next year. More cheers. More congratulations. My mother dabbed at the corners of her eyes with a napkin. My baby boy, she said. A beautiful home, a stable job, and now thinking about a family. You've done everything right, Samuel. Then she turned to me. That same expression, a blend of concern, confusion, and the soft scorn that only a mother can mask as love. Lillian, darling, don't you want that too? To settle down, build a life? I took a sip of water, placing my glass down gently. The table fell quiet. I already have, I said simply. I just didn't send out invitations. There was silence. A stunned, heavy quiet. Forks stopped. Eyes widened. Samuel's eyebrows rose. Vanessa tilted her head. Mom blinked once, then twice. What do you mean? She finally asked. I bought a home. 8 months ago. You bought where? Outside of Greenville. A little ways off the hiking trail I used to go to in college. Why didn't you tell anyone? She asked, tone sharpening. I smiled. No one asked. Samuel tried to laugh. What kind of place are we talking? 1-bedroom apartment? A starter? I looked at him. 4,200 square feet. On 3 acres. With a creek in the back. Paid in cash. Aunt Doris dropped her fork. My mother went pale. You paid, cash, she whispered. Yes. The tension at the table could have been sliced with the butter knife. Samuel gripped his wineglass like it was an anchor. Vanessa looked like she'd just bitten into something sour. That's quite a house, Mom said, eyes narrowing. Not excessive if you don't have a mortgage, I replied. The weight of that sentence hit the table like a stone. No mortgage. No loans. No debt. Samuel looked at me. Really looked at me, for the first time in years. And for the first time, I wasn't the one squirming in my seat. For a long moment, the only sounds at the table were the ticking of the dining room clock and the faint clinking of cutlery being slowly set down. I could feel every pair of eyes fixed on me, my mother's, my brother's, my relatives'. The weight of surprise, confusion, and disbelief was almost tangible. You really bought a house, in cash? Aunt Doris repeated, as if needing confirmation a second time. Yes, I said again, calm but clear. My mother's voice was small. But how? I mean, how did you afford that? I've been working hard, I said simply. Promotions. Investments. Equity from my company's acquisition last year. I didn't spend much. I saved, planned. Made smart choices. Samuel leaned back slowly in his chair, his face stiff. And you didn't think to share this? To tell the family? You mean the family that never asked how I was doing unless it involved comparing me to you? I met his eyes without flinching. There's never been space for both of us in the spotlight. And I stopped waiting for someone to hand me a flashlight. Samuel's face flushed, but before he could reply, I turned to our mother. Mom, do you know what my title is now? At work? She blinked. No. You never said. Chief Technology Officer. I've led 3 successful launches, oversaw a merger, and mentored 2 junior teams. My stock options were worth over $1 million when we got acquired. The words fell like marbles onto a glass floor. They echoed. I had no idea, she whispered. Of course not. Because every conversation we've had in the last 5 years has somehow circled back to Samuel. His jobs, his relationships, his plans. I learned to stop offering details. You never held on to them. Samuel suddenly pushed back his chair, standing abruptly. You think this makes you better? That one house or a job title erases everything? No, I said, staying seated. But it does mean I'm not less than you. And I'm tired of pretending I am. He turned to leave the room, but not before adding sharply, at least I don't have to go digging through people's lives to feel good about mine. My breath caught. He knew. Somehow, he knew I had seen his financials. I stood slowly, facing him. And yet, despite knowing how unstable your finances are, you still took Mom's retirement money. You made her think you had it all under control, when in reality, you're drowning. Mom turned to him. What's she talking about? He didn't respond. Samuel, she said again, more forcefully. What is she talking about? I just needed a little help to get started. $15,000, plus asking for more? I said. You told her you were just short, but your credit score says otherwise. You're over $200,000 in debt, not counting the mortgage. Mom's hands went to her mouth. No. That can't be right. I overheard the conversation at your pre-approval party, I said gently. I didn't want to interfere. But someone needed to tell you. Samuel's jaw tightened. This isn't your business. You made it my business when you kept accepting support from a woman who ignored her own daughter's success for decades just to prop you up. Lillian, enough, Mom said quietly. I turned to her. It's not about the money. Not really. It's about the fact that you've invested everything, time, energy, praise, resources into someone who hasn't been honest with you. And you never once asked me if I needed anything. You never even asked me how I was really doing. She looked older in that moment than I'd ever seen her. Not because of age, but because the illusion had cracked. What do you want me to say? She asked, tears brimming in her eyes. I don't want anything, I said softly. I just wanted you to see me. For once. I left shortly after. No dessert. No hugs. Just silence. 2 weeks passed. Then came the text. Lillian, please. We need to talk. Samuel's having some financial struggles and I'm trying to help. Maybe you could guide him? Offer advice? Of course. Not a word about what I'd said. No apology. No follow-up question about my life. Just a request to help Samuel again. I stared at my phone, feeling the same familiar heat of frustration creep into my chest. Let me understand, I typed. After years of ignoring my success, after learning I bought a home on my own, with no debt, your first instinct is to ask me to help Samuel? Again? Are you serious? She replied. Don't be like that, Lillian. You've always been the independent one. He needs help. We're family. I closed my eyes. That sentence. It had been her refrain for years. Independence framed not as strength, but as an excuse to ignore me. To expect nothing of Samuel and everything of me. I typed my final reply. Then let family help him. Because I'm done. I won't be guilted into fixing problems I didn't create. I built my life without anyone's help. I don't owe anyone anything, not even an explanation. And then, for the first time in my life, I blocked my mother's number. I blocked Samuel's, too. I sat on my back deck that evening with Oscar resting at my feet, the trees gently swaying under a winter breeze. I watched the last of the sun dip below the horizon and let the quiet surround me. The world didn't fall apart. No storm followed. Just peace. The next day, Marianne sent me a message. Aunt Mabel says you're now a legend in the family. Apparently, Uncle Carl's still stunned silent. I laughed. Tell them not to expect an encore. Mom wants to know when she can visit, she added. I may have shown her the pictures of your house. She's welcome anytime, I wrote back. You too. But let's be clear, some invitations won't be extended. Understood. I turned off my phone, set it on the table, and looked out at my property, the life I built. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a forgotten daughter. I felt like exactly who I was meant to be. Lillian Hart. Seen. Heard. Whole. Thank you for watching the video. Like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.